From the headquarters of the American Radio Relay League in Newington, Connecticut, this is ARRL Audio News for Friday, June 2nd, 2017. This program is produced by the ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, and features news highlights compiled from the ARRL letter, found on the web at arrl.org. I'm Sean Kutzko, KX9X.
And I'm your co-host, Carla Pereira.
In this week's report, the build-out of the nationwide first responder broadband network could drive amateur radio emergency service changes.
Amateur radio provides communications link following Sri Lanka flooding.
And our sun's 11-year magnetic cycle appears destined to disappear.
These stories and others, plus Bruce Page, KK5DO, with this week's satellite update, all coming up now.
Hi, I'm ARRL member Don Minkoff, NK6A of Mar Vista, California, and you're listening to ARRL Audio News.
The First Responder Network Authority, or FirstNet, a nationwide wireless broadband network for first responders, could change the complexion of how the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, or ARRS, functions to support communication for responders during disasters and emergencies. As an independent authority within the U.S. Department of Commerce's National Telecommunication and Information Administration, FirstNet's mission is to build out, deploy, and operate an interoperable nationwide broadband network dedicated to first responders. Ralph Haller, N4RH, the chairman of the National Public Safety Telecommunications Council, or NIPSTIC, told ARRL that the advent of FirstNet will likely be as significant as when public safety first began using radio. The nationwide network will be hardened, so it will be more likely that many of today's public safety systems remain operational in emergencies, Haller said, pointing out that amateur radio should not expect to have access to FirstNet. He cautioned the endurance of amateur radio systems in disasters has been a big selling point in the past for incorporating amateur operators in emergency plans, but perhaps not so much in the future. NIPSTIC is a federation of organizations that work toward improving public safety communication and interoperability, and ARRL has a seat on NIPSTIC's governing board. Haller predicted that amateur radio's role in emergencies will not disappear. There is no substitute for eyes and ears on the ground in an emergency, he said, adding that radio amateurs can and should continue to play an important part in supporting emergency communication. Amateur operators can continue to provide valuable information to emergency operations centers in the recovery phase of disasters, he said. On March 30th, FirstNet and the Commerce Department announced a 25-year partnership with AT&T as the primary contractor to make FirstNet a reality. The ability to communicate seamlessly across jurisdictions is critical for law enforcement, fire, and emergency medical services when securing large events or responding to emergencies and disasters, a Commerce Department news release said. More information on this story is available on the web at arrl.org.
Members of the Radio Society of Sri Lanka responded to an urgent call for help in the wake of torrential monsoon rainfall in southwestern Sri Lanka on May 28th that caused flooding and landslides. The Road Development Authority, or RDA, contacted RSSL President Jalia Lokeshwara, 4S7JL, seeking communication help from radio amateurs. The RSSL reports that emergency communication was needed to link remote Kalawana, one of the worst hit areas, and Ratnapura. All communication had failed due to heavy flooding, landslides, and damage to the telecommunications infrastructure. The RDA declared roads were impassable. Only air rescue by the Sri Lanka Air Force helicopters was possible, and the lack of communication support made that task even more difficult. Julia, 4S7JL, and Nadika, 4S6 and CH, were the first ready to go. A second team consisted of Victor, 4S7VK, and Dimitu, 4S7DZ. Within 30 minutes of landing, the high-frequency link was established. They used 40 and 75 meters as well as 2 meters. He said they spent 2 days coordinating rescue flights, the movement of patients from Kalawana Hospital to Ratnapura, and food drops. The emergency link remained in place until mobile phone service was restored and roadways cleared.
Over the Memorial Day weekend, WX4NHC at the National Hurricane Center in Miami logged nearly 200 contacts throughout the U.S., Canada, the Caribbean, and even Europe during its annual station test, conducted ahead of the 2017 hurricane season, which began on June 1st and continues through November 30th. The annual exercise on May 27th served to check out amateur radio station equipment, antennas, and computer systems. "We had a very successful WX4NHC radio station test," said Assistant WX4NHC Amateur Radio Coordinator Julio Ripple, WD4R. "All of our radio and computer equipment and new main HF dipole antenna worked well. We feel that our equipment will perform well if needed during this hurricane season." WX4NHC was on the air for about 8 hours, Ripoll said, and utilized all communication modes available at the station on HF, VHF, and UHF, including Echolink, IRLP, DMR, D-Star, DRATS, and digital HF messaging via WinLink. From the Canadian Hurricane Center in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Bob Robichaud, VE1MBR, expressed appreciation for the cooperation between the Canadian and U.S. Hurricane Centers and WX4NHC during the storm season, Ripoll said. Rob Macedo, KD1CY, served as net control station for the VOIP Hurricane Net from WA1EMA at the Acushnet, Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency.
Online, via podcast, and on repeaters around the world, you're listening to ARRL Audio News.
Now, with this week's satellite update, here's Bruce Page, KK5DO.
If you have visited the AMSAT.org website, you might have noticed it had a lot of information. We have been working hard to make it easier to navigate and have streamlined the site. We will bring the new and improved website as well as a new online store active on Friday, June 2nd. There will be a member self-service section. You can join, renew, and manage your own account. We also are planning a special members-only area. The store will operate smoother and bring AMSAT up to date. The website was one of the high-priority items that we worked on during the strategic planning meeting. Check out our new site at amsat.org. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO, for the ARRL Audio News.
More than 24 QB-50 Constellation CubeSats have been deployed from the International Space Station, or ISS, including 3 carrying amateur radio transponders. Built by students from 23 countries, the String of Pearls QB-50 Constellation aims to study the lower thermosphere 200 to 380 kilometers above Earth. The satellites were launched to the ISS in March aboard an Atlas V rocket. In all, 28 QB-50 CubeSats were released into orbit between May 16th and May 25th. These included LILAC-SAT-1, which includes an amateur radio VHF, UHF, FM to codec to BPSK digital voice transponder, APRS digipeater, and a camera. LILAC-SAT-1 was developed at the Harbin Institute of Technology. Its primary payload is an ion and neutral particle mass spectrometer, developed by the University of London, to measure the mass and distribution of charged and neutral atoms. Shortly after its deployment, LILAC-SAT-1 took a picture of the ISS solar panels, and the image was received by students on 70 centimeters using 9600 BPS BPSK. 8 other QB-50 CubeSats will be placed into orbit from India on board Polar satellite launch vehicles. No launch campaign has been announced for another 4 QB-50 CubeSats.
Flea market tips is the topic of the current episode of the ARRL The Doctor Is In podcast. Sponsored by DX Engineering, ARRL The Doctor Is In is an informative discussion of all things technical. Listen on your computer, tablet, or smartphone, whenever and wherever you like. Every 2 weeks, your host, QST Editor-in-Chief Steve Ford, WB8IMY, and the doctor himself, Joel Hallis, W1ZR, will discuss a broad range of technical topics. You can also email your questions to doctor@arrl.org, and the doctor may answer them in a future podcast. Enjoy ARRL The Doctor Is In on Apple iTunes or by using your iPhone or iPad podcast app. You can also listen online at Blueberry or at Stitcher or through the free Stitcher app for iOS, Kindle, or Android devices.
Brian Lloyd, WB6RQN, took off from Miami, Florida on June 1st on a solo round-the-world flight to commemorate Amelia Earhart's attempt to circumnavigate the globe 80 years ago. Lloyd will be on the air from Spirit. his single-engine Mooney 231 aircraft, during the course of his journey, expected to take 2 months. He will follow Earhart's historic route to fly around the globe at the equator, starting in Miami, skirting the Caribbean islands, then passing along the coast of South America before heading across the Atlantic. I am driven by the spirit of historic flights, Lloyd said before leaving his Texas airstrip for Miami. It is important to remember the aviation pioneers like Amelia Earhart and their contributions to aviation. Their bold actions made today's air travel possible for all of us. In late May, severe weather on the Atlantic route and aircraft equipment problems forced Lloyd to call off his New York to Paris speed flight. There was only a short window of time that the flight could have happened, and that window has now closed, a May 22nd announcement said. Lloyd will be on the air using HFSSB on or about 14.210 MHz, 14.346 MHz, 18.117.5 MHz, or 7.130 MHz. On board, he has a Mobat MICOM 3 transceiver, which puts out about 125 watts. His antenna is under the fuselage. He also will utilize ALE, or Automatic Link Establishment, on the amateur radio HF link frequencies. The 62-year-old Lloyd said, "The flight route has some very long legs, so I will have plenty of opportunities during June and July to talk with ham operators while flying over the world's oceans."
Hi, I'm ARRL member Buddy Soul, KC4WQ of Shepherdsville, Kentucky, and you're listening to ARRL Audio News.
And finally, the sun's 11-year magnetic cycle appears to be ending, albeit not anytime soon. In a paper submitted on May 26 to the journal Solar Physics, 2 solar scientists are reinterpreting earlier evidence to hypothesize that the sun's rotation rate and magnetic field are in a transitional phase that could lead to lengthening solar cycles, with the cycle ultimately disappearing altogether between 800 million and 2.4 billion years from now. Travis S. Metcalf and Jennifer Van Saders proposed the scenario in their paper Magnetic Evolution and the Disappearance of Sun-like Activity Cycles. After decades of effort, the solar activity cycle is exceptionally well characterized, but it remains poorly understood, the authors say in the paper's abstract. Pioneering work at the Mount Wilson Observatory demonstrated that other sun-like stars also show regular activity cycles and suggested 2 possible relationships between the rotation rate and the length of the cycle. Neither of these relationships correctly describe the properties of the sun, a peculiarity that demands explanation. The authors cite stellar evidence for the shutdown of magnetic braking in stars similar to our sun. The new picture of rotational and magnetic evolution provides a framework for understanding some observational features of stellar activity cycles that have until now been mysterious, they said. Metcalf explained their observations through a recent Forbes magazine article. Our previous discoveries identified an unexpected transition in the rotation and magnetism of middle-aged stars, Metcalf is quoted in the article, "The Sun's Magnetic Dynamo is Weakening," by Bruce Dormany. We now have direct evidence that the stellar dynamo, the mechanism inside stars that sustains their magnetic fields, actually shuts down during this transition. Metcalf is listed on the paper as being associated with the Space Science Institute and the White Dwarf Research Corporation, both in Boulder, Colorado. Van Saders is listed as being associated with the observatories of the Carnegie Institution for Science in Pasadena, California, and the Department of Astrophysical Sciences at Princeton University in New Jersey.
That concludes ARRL Audio News for this week. Our thanks to all contributors to this week's report. ARRL Audio News is produced by the American Radio Relay League, the National Association for Amateur Radio. For more information on amateur radio or the ARRL, visit us on the web at arrl.org. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram by searching for ARRL. If you have a question or comment about ARRL Audio News, email us at audionews@arrl.org. This program is copyright 2017 ARRL, all rights reserved. Until next week, I'm Carla Pereira.
And I'm Sean Kutzko, KX9X 73, and thanks for listening.